Back to your full crew. We hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. If you celebrated that, we're here today with some great guests and our co-host Mike Peel.
Hey, so I'm the other co-host of the full crew. Sorry for the technical difficulties today. We got a little trouble getting started, but we're here in Restream as a backup. We still have some great guests for you and some great articles. So we're going to be talking about a GPS incident in Denver that is kind of unprecedented, but really interesting. We're going to be talking about AI generated art, and I hope we do an even bigger deep dive than we have been doing, because we actually have an AI artist with us today, or not an AI artist, just a regular digital artist. We're also going to be talking about some AI failures out of Meta's camp, and then excitingly, we're going to be taking a trip back to Japan and talking about electricity generated from snow. So lots of interesting stuff. We've got some great guests for us today. We're going to go in alphabetical order, introducing them. So we've got Jonty. Jonty, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Jonty Kasku-Jackson. I'm a digital and traditional artist out of the Pacific Northwest, although I reside here in Colorado Springs right now. I take digital paintings and put them onto canvas, or I take and paint traditionally and then digitize those and manipulate those. And in my day job, I am a policy and strategy instructor at the National Security Space Institute, so I got a little bit of interest in GPS.
Awesome. Thank you. And we also have Joshua. Joshua, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. My name's Josh. I'm the CEO of StarNav. It's a startup based in Southern California. We develop alternatives to GPS using other signals in the environment that aren't traditionally for GPS, such as cellular signals, television, and internet signals. I received my PhD from the University of California, Irvine. So by trade or by education, I'm actually an engineer, but I am the CEO of StarNav running a business. So here we are.
Awesome. And so you're going to be talking a little bit about GPS. You brought up a great article for us, and this was type of like doomsday scenario I never could have imagined, but it seems like they dealt with it. Can you tell us what's going on?
Yeah. Oh, I'm on this side.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. This is a an interesting article, and this isn't new. This is stuff that keeps happening, and it's reoccurring, and it's just starting to make the news. So I thought this was an important article to bring here. So thanks, Don, for inviting me to talk about this a little bit. But what happened here was an anomaly with GPS, and it wasn't initially known what caused it. But the first reports that came out were actually notice to airmen, so to pilots, that was released that told them that there was some GPS interference. And really what happened was GPS was blocked in a 40 all the way up to 40,000 feet, which is as high as you will fly on an airliner, and in a 50 nautical mile radius around the Denver airport. So we were seeing official reports starting to come out, or actually warnings to the pilots that there were going to be issues with their GPS. It was affecting something known as the Wide Area Augmentation System. Some of you know it as WAAS, as well as the Ground-Based Augmentation System, GBAS, which helps GPS precision. And even perhaps more scary is the TCAS system that's equipped on these aircrafts, which prevents collisions. So the collision avoidance systems were also affected. So this was the article that was dropped around August time, but this incident actually happened in January, and it just didn't become publicly talked about until a group in Stanford was doing research on this and started publishing articles, and several universities started publishing articles on it. And at that point, that's when the government went ahead and came out and started talking about this incident. And so that's... please, Don.
Yeah, I want to jump in here. First of all, this strikes very close to home for Jonty and me both. I mean, we live, very close to Denver here in Colorado. This is absolutely frightening. I just want to fill in a couple more facts to kind of set the stage here. This was a GPS problem for 8,000 square miles in the Denver area that occurred on January 21st. And Josh, to your point, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is investigating this. This article said they would come out with a report called GPS Interference Happens in October. I did Google that. I have not found it. So if that report was supposed to come out, it has not yet, unless one of you guys found it. But this incident lasted for 33.5 hours. And what really, I mean, all of those things you said, Josh, scared the heck out of me. But the one, it almost sounds like not only was the GPS signal jammed, it sounds like it was almost spoofed in some respects, because there was one person that, the NASA has that system, the ASRAS, the Aviation Safety Reporting System. A bunch of people, bunch of pilots had reported things exactly around this time frame. So there's kind of a correlation there. And I feel like I'm trying to look at my notes here. It was so bizarre where the person didn't know, like, not only didn't know where they were, but it was almost like, I don't know. I'm sorry. I can't find it in my notes. I took very thorough notes and I'm just like not finding it here. But it was almost like they thought they were actually somewhere else or something. When I read this article, I was thinking not only were these signals jammed up, but they were possibly being spoofed and oh, I know what it was. They got some notification. It actually told them to avoid another aircraft that didn't exist, that wasn't there. And that's when I was like, holy shnikes, whoever is doing this, they're like testing everything out to make sure that they can not only jam, but maybe spoof things too. And that's crazy. I would love to get Jonty's thoughts on this.
Well, I've seen things like this happen overseas. Like North Korea is infamous for spoofing and jamming GPS along the Korean border. So you have huge shipping containers with their GPS tracking being located in the middle of a town somewhere, as opposed to out at sea.
Wow.
We are always concerned about things like interference, like the light squared interference. Is that going to terrestrial signals going to interfere with GPS? But this was not anything indicative of something like a little bit of interference on the fringes there. This was a huge area of impact. So that one, when I read this article, I'm kind of like, whoa, this sounds like things that happen elsewhere, not here in the United States.
Right. Traditionally, wide area spreads like this are jamming incidents versus spoofing. And, the spoofing effects or the spoofing symptoms can appear in jamming incidents such as this one. So like the TCAS, maybe we're talking about the same thing when I mentioned the TCAS. That is the collision avoidance systems on the aircrafts, commercial ones especially, and they could give false indications that there are aircrafts in their path, especially if their GPS is off and their position is reported to the system in a different, the inertial start to drift or whatever starts to happen. Some weird things can start happening. And to answer your other question, Don, about like if we found that article, I haven't found that article that Department of Homeland Security is supposed to put out, or that report, but it is known, or at least it was reported by the government, that they're actually not going to release the identity of the source. But for the Denver incident, I believe they did figure out the source, but they are not going to disclose that.
Oh, they did figure it out. Oh, well, then if you're not telling us it's a national security issue, it's not just Homeland Security. To Jonty's point, maybe it's one of our very big state actors that has some, folks in the Denver area testing out some cool things, see how they can mess with the U.S. I don't know, Mike. What do you think?
Well, I'm by no means an expert on this stuff. I'm kind of taken off guard by it. So I guess my question to everybody else is, what are our abilities to mitigate risk if one such incident like this happens again? Like, is there onboard kind of LiDAR or perception technology on the larger aircraft? I mean, I've worked mostly in drones, and they would have computer vision. But how damaging is this interference? Would it even interfere with kind of that level of the drone ability to determine where it is in space. So
Or
does that
commercial
apply?
airlines, Mike. I
Yeah.
mean, this was Denver International Airport. So
No, but
Josh,
that's what
maybe,
that's
yeah,
what I'm saying, Don.
yeah,
So I'm saying from knowing what drones are capable of,
yeah.
how big is the interference? Like, is there any way to mitigate this?
Right. Yeah. These are this discussion could take a whole session probably, because it comes all the way back to who's responsible even to determine if it actually is an event or if it's just a particular user equipment that's failing. I've attended meetings recently. The Department of Transportation, their approach or their suggestion is that we move to a crowdsourced based solution to where there's some kind of information that's shared with everybody about their quality of GPS. So it would be good to know if your GPS is failing, if others around you is also failing, so you can disambiguate if it's actually your equipment or if there's something bigger going on. Once that's determined, then the mitigation question is both on how do you keep yourself safe, and then the other part of the mitigation question is who's responsible to go and stop that transmission source and that interference source. So both of those are topics that could be talked about. But I mean, this is what we're working on at StarNav, to be honest. I mean, we're deploying these other backup systems that can be equipped on drones or on aircraft that use other signals in the environment that are in different frequency bands, such that if GPS is interfered with, then the other signals are still clean and can be usable. And they could be cellular signals, and other signals, low Earth orbit satellite signals, have been shown to be able to be a reliable source of positioning. So these are the... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Homeland Security, FAA, they've been working on this for a while. DOT put out a report several years ago about complementary and backup PNT, or position, navigation, and timing. There's, it's obviously a food fight for funding. What is the technology that works? It's a great report. I've written about this for Inside GNSS, and also to Jonty's point, you mentioned Light Squared. That's the precursor organization to a company now called Legato. They're trying to do 5G using mobile satellite stations, basically terrestrial based. So from the satellite, the signal beams down and then it beams out. And there's a report just came out from the National Academy of Sciences that says most GPS won't be interfered with commercial, but DoD GPS, absolutely. And also there was another thing, but I just, that article's on my website. I've been writing about this for Inside GNSS, but this interference issue, again, to what Josh said, this is kind of longstanding, and this incident, I'd say, is like the crown jewel of anything I've ever heard, because I've never heard of anything to this extent. I've heard of things like what Jonty said. I heard the Russians were messing around in the Black Sea during some military exercises before the Ukraine, conflict, where just like what she said in North Korea, all those ships, they thought they were at an airport on land. Like that's how significant, that's how easy they can do these things. And so this is not news for people. What is news is like the extent of this thing, and the fact that we really just don't have more information about it, I think, is what makes it scarier.
Yeah. And then following this event, in October, or I need to look at my notes to find the exact date, but very recently there was an event at Dallas. And some of you may have heard of that one, and similar in flavor. You have an unknown outage of GPS, and a lot of time and resources were poured into trying to identify that source. And unlike the Denver source, they weren't able to narrow down the location of that source. And so that one is, the government is even saying, is still an unknown anomaly that lasted for hours. I can find the exact number, but it's just scary that these events are, they're happening more frequently and larger in magnitude, and right here at home. So as drones start to enter the airspace, and other, vehicles are entering the airspace that are unmanned going into the future here, and sharing with manned aircraft, these are things that definitely need to be talked about more. And what is going to happen when these events do occur, who's responsible for avoiding hitting each other and stuff. So this is why I brought this article forward. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, lots to digest there. I mean, if you think about any other system that could be automated, let's say like a train, at least it's on rails, right? If, you know, with the bus, there's a driver. With a pilot, though, so much of their perception in the sky is based off of their instruments. So even for the commercial manned aircraft, it's a huge issue. All right, something a little bit happier, but definitely interesting stuff. Thanks, Josh. I mean, I'm always happy when my zone of understanding expands. So thank you for bringing that up. But we're going to jump on to AI art, which has been a topic we've covered quite a bit on this podcast. So Jonty, tell us a little bit why you brought up this article that was in Wired.
Well, this is an article that is near and dear to my heart. I've started playing with some of the AI, and it's not as easy as it looks to start off with. You have to get the right prompts. You have to, it's, as this article talks about, it's a co-creator kind of thing between human and an artificial intelligence to get the image that you want. I'm lazy. I find it easier to pick up a paintbrush or my pad and figure out the image that I want and do it that way. I'm just not that skilled as an AI artist. I'm much more of a digital artist. But one of the things that intrigued me was this concept of, will AI art replace human artists? And there was a counter article that talked about this, because the way an AI is trained, it looks at millions of images, and then it creates a not necessarily a collage, but it takes bits and pieces, it extrapolates, and creates these fantastic images. The other thing that can go is if you've got and doesn't want to be part of that training pool, it says, I want my art to be my own and people not to be able to replicate my art. What we're finding now is people are taking specific artists and saying, do this in the style of this particular illustrator. And the AI comes back and creates pictures that look like they were done by this particular person without necessarily getting that person's permission. So that was the second article. So there's this tension between artists fighting to say, I want to be, so my influence is out there and you can train off my images, versus artists say, impacting my livelihood. If I paint a certain way and you create the exact same style, then you're taking away my livelihood. So AI is a tool. I mean, for a long time, there's this debate about, is AI art? And I don't think that debate is helpful, but I think the debate on, can you protect the artist? Can you copyright it? What about the intellectual property rights? Do you need permissions? Those are things I think that we really need to be looking at, because we've hit that phase of people can, spend a couple bucks and create these masterpieces in the style of another artist. So in some ways it's very efficient for non-artists, but it's I won't say thievery, but some artists, you are actually taking away their ability to create a livelihood if you can, essentially copy them completely. So that's why I thought that was an important one. There are other things that visual AIs can do, like the Wired article talks about being able to recognize drug molecules and say this is, a good thing. So, maybe the training is good, but we need to deal with what's happening with the artists that are using these AIs, and then the people who are not artists using these AIs in the art community. And artists are notoriously bad at dealing with these things.
Yes, this is true. As I call myself an artist. Some people disagree, but no. We've brought up a class action lawsuit that was had to do with GitHub Copilot, and I think there was some interesting precedent being set there, where essentially they said they were violating the license of how that code should be used. And I thought about this, and that really is kind of going on. The same thing is going on when you're training a model with another artist's work. You're violating the license and the understanding and how that art would be used and displayed. And if you can't make the case that your model could produce that output without that artist's work, I think there might be a case, thinking back to also when I was a failed musician, that there might be a case based on sample law, where if you're essentially you're not recreating the exact thing, but you are modifying a work, and without that work, your work could not exist. So I think there might be a class action. And here's the thing that I thought was interesting. I think I sent another article for us to look over. I'll try to post that in the chat, or maybe send it around to our email list. Put it in the description, actually. I'll put it in the description of the YouTube link, that talked about essentially a Disney artist whose work wasn't owned by her. It was owned by Disney, that was being used to train the model. So it's one thing to beat up little artists, which seems to be a favorite of corporations throughout history, or anybody who has the power to do it, right? But it's another thing when you mess with Disney. So I think there's even a case for large corporations to start suing about IP infringement with these algorithms. And I think one of the things in the article that I sent was the guy had mentioned that it's kind of like the algorithm is recalling a distant memory. That's personification. These things are a tool, and it's just parameters. You're putting parameters in, you know that what you put into that code. So attribution still matters. Doesn't matter that it was engineered and simple or doable at scale. It's still infringement. People could steal photography at scale. That doesn't mean that copyright doesn't exist. So I think we're about to see these tools evolve in interesting ways. They are amazing, but like I think there's plenty of room for improvement, even if you're going to be an AI artist. Like you said, you found it hard to navigate the prompts. Most people do, because it's kind of like black magic, and it's still like a slot machine. So I think there's going to be improvement along that. I think there's going to be improvement with 3D assets, but I think the IP stuff is, I think we're about to see some landmark cases, and I think it'll be interesting. Joshua, what do you think?
Well, I'm not an expert in the law around, modifying images, but I know that there is some rules around modifying an image, and it does enable you to use it as long as it's modified beyond a certain amount. And maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I just know when our marketing team or somebody is going to create something and you do source things, most of the time you try to look for things that are either royalty free or you don't have to get a license to use it. But then we do know that the team that puts these together knows that there's rules around if you do reuse things, as long as you modify it beyond a certain extent, then it goes into an area where it is legal to use. So how does that play a factor in here? If you are training a model that is of one person's art, but also you're feeding it other input into it, such that the output then is modified beyond that threshold, whatever that is, does this then make it legal?
Yeah.
Is that a gray area, or are the rules cut and dry there? I don't know.
It's definitely a gray area still, and the word that you're thinking of is transformative. And I'm not an IP lawyer by any means, but I know if you just created a song out of 100 different samples, you would owe 100 different artists money. So that the question is, but if you took, let's say, a picture of Barack Obama, and then actually with your hands created an image like that, and then added new colors, that could be considered transformative. Right. So the famous Obama poster is technically that, the Hope poster.
So I guess the question is the computer doing this new output or manipulating the original images that were fed to train the model and considered the artist's own hand that's publishing the work?
Well, I'd like to jump in because what I found really interesting in this article was this idea of co-creating, right? So at least right now for this AI, right, as we always say, the output is only as good as the input, and who's inputting that data or those parameters, it's a human being. And so someone is out there grabbing stuff off the internet, feeding it into this AI mod, right? And then it's spewing out when you put in as I don't know if it's Mike, you said the black magic, you put in your magical like word, prompts, word stew, and it comes out with this really cool image. So there right now there's a human behind this, and I agree that is a tool. I love Jonty's point, being an artist, saying like, let's get out of this art debate. Let's get out of the debate. Is this art? Is it not? I love the fact, Jonty, that you said this is a new medium. I think I would agree with that. I never really thought of it that way, honestly. But I think this is all about the IP. How is this going to get settled out? And when you look at some of those images, especially the woman we talked about that was commissioned by Disney to do some of these almost like anime-like caricatures of the Disney characters, and then you see what AI has done to produce similar things, like a Thor, I think was one of the pictures. It looks just like her style. I mean, you would think she did, and I think that's what she talked about. Hey, there's a lot of feeling, a lot of emotion. AI can't pick that up. To me, not being an artist, I look at that and I think it was her that did it, because it looks just like her style. Like, I don't know if I'm dating myself here. Do you guys remember the artist Nagel? In the 1980s, like the Duran Duran Rio cover was done by that artist, and it was a very distinct style. I imagine you could train this AI to say, like, make this Nagel-like, and then be creating all kinds of Nagel-like, things with a couple pushes of a button. The only other thing I want to say is this. Legal research is also dependent on these and probably just normal Google research, but definitely legal research. You go into these search engines and you have to like put together this magical, list of words to come out with what you're trying to find. That's friggin' hard. I honestly hated doing that. So if this was how you have to use this tool, this is not one that I'd be real jazzed about, because that in and of itself is just a whole different way of thinking. I'm not very good at that way of thinking. So I imagine using this tool is really difficult. It's not as easy as, hey, it took me 2 minutes and I came up with something great. So for what that's worth.
Yeah, I mean, there's people that they are just really, really good at it.
Yeah.
But they're putting in the time and figuring out kind of the rules to the prompts. Some people have actually published books on prompts that work certain ways, and so that is the art right now. But in terms of the IP stuff, I mean, some of these companies flat out just scraped ArtStation, and that's violating the license. I really don't understand where they even got the gall to do that. But that's a Silicon Valley mentality. Ask for forgiveness later. So we'll see how that pans out. I don't see the technology going away, and I don't think anybody's, even when you talk with artists, they're not really fighting against the technology. They're just fighting about the misuse and misrepresentation of their work and themselves. And I think those are fair grounds.
Case in point with Jonty. I mean, I love her perspective on this. Hey, Mike, I know we're in a little bit of a different format. I don't know if you recall our sponsors, just to give a quick shout out. It's normally the time we would do that.
Oh, yeah, I do recall our sponsors, and we've got a new one. We want to say thank you to Skydio for joining the fray as a full crew sponsor. We're going to have Brendan Groves on tomorrow. We're excited to have him. I haven't spoken with Brendan for like 2 years, and he was one of my best Interdrone podcast episodes. So I'm looking forward to hearing his backstory hosted by Dawn tomorrow. We also got a product release coming from Drone Deck. We're going to be doing that at 3 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, I think. Maybe 5 p.m.
Eastern, yeah.
3 p.m. Mountain. I was on Dawn's time this time. So other sponsors, we still have Drone Rescue Systems. We still have Aiken Gump. And just want to thank them for their sponsor. Oh, yeah, and Airspace Link. Thank them for their sponsorship of the full crew. We're going to be moving on. We're going to go quickly through this one because this is kind of just more me hating on the FANG companies. But it's now Meta, so I'll still be calling it Facebook till I die. Sorry, Mark. But anyway, basically, this reminded me of when Microsoft tried to put an AI out into the wild. It was a chatbot AI, and they hadn't really sufficiently trained or tested it, and it ended up coming back with some pretty racist results. In this case, Meta trained an AI in 48 million science papers, and it was shut down after 2 days, basically because it was spreading misinformation. So, I mean, this also kind of brings an issue to the fore in the scientific community and just college research in general, the way that the publications determined to publish research and how that is actually verified by the community over time. It actually takes a lot of human work, and a lot of the output is in the details. And even then, they get it kind of strikingly wrong, because it kind of takes time to figure out if these things work at scale. So it might just be that we haven't found an AI or algorithm that's sufficient enough to actually weed through the in-between lines. And I think Meta kind of just put this thing out half-baked. And I kind of want to say that I don't think that that is a knock against AI technology or machine learning technology in general. I just think that there was too much of a corporate push to push this out before it was actually ready for the masses. So what did everybody kind of think about the results? I'm kind of more interested in that. Jonty or Josh, you want to take it?
Well, I thought it was interesting that many of the articles that come out are counter to each other. So yes, this thing works, and then the other one is no, this doesn't. So that, having a machine learning to incorporate that is going to be very difficult. But I thought it was really interesting, the question on does vaccine cause autism, and the answer was yes, no, yes, or no, yes, no. So it contradicted itself in its own answer, which is part of what you see in the community, so it's reflective of that. But the problem that came to mind was it was written in authoritative language, so people look at authoritative language and go, must be true. So I think that's a danger, that these things need to be tested out, trained up a little bit better before it's put out there, because people are going to take these as an authoritative source. So that's what concerned me.
Yeah, also science is evolving too, right? So authoritative today might be have some extra nuance that could be very important later, and doesn't necessarily invalidate, but doesn't also validate the previous research. So Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the output is just a function. Like, it depends on the research article's goal, I guess. So the output of these is inevitably going to be some kind of fusion or function of all the input, right, that is being put into the system. And so if you're trying to publish like new research, then this definitely wouldn't work, I suppose, right? Because it's just going to be combining a bunch of previously researched items on that topic. Maybe you'll get some new insights, but as we've already seen, there's inconsistencies that are being produced by the system. So I know that when I publish, I graduated in 2020 and I still have stuff that's under review. So it takes years sometimes that go back and forth between the original publisher. And that doesn't seem to be what's happening here. So maybe there could be some feedback loop that's introduced that can correct and help the system to where you have some guided learning model that's happening where it spits something back at you and you say, no, this doesn't seem right. And then it loops and then it corrects it. I don't know.
It's so, we were just talking about AI art, and this is like AI science, if you will, right? AI focused on science. And, people say it's an art or it's a science or it's both. And there's a reason for that. I think when people think science, they think truth. They think there's a grain of truth there somewhere. And, there are still people out there, I know it's unbelievable, that think the world is flat. But I believe most of
their arguments are increasingly good too. Like in terms of like stuff they came up with, you're like, wow, I could see how you logically came to that conclusion without actually looking at evidence.
Right. So, but yeah, at some point that became kind of a scientific truth that the earth is round. Right. And, but between the original thought and that other, the hey, the world is round thought, there was a lot of back and forth in between. And it's that in between, as Josh said, people taking years to publish a paper, get approved, peer reviewed, it's mashing all that together and then coming up with a non-answer. By the way, this thing was called Galactica. It even struggled to perform kindergarten math. So like when you think of math and you think of science, math is one of those things that's based on, I think, universal principles. I'm not a mathematician by any means. I don't certainly do public math, but to not know that 1 + 2 = 3 and to come up with something different as your answer, I think, whoa, no wonder they shut this thing down after 48 hours. So I think what really, we're back to the frightening area, like just where we were with the GPS, outages. Here, the article mentions this thing can be seriously misused. What was frightening to me is that Meta, as a company, has chosen not to have a quote unquote AI safety team, like seems to be the standard in the industry, like DeepMind, OpenAI, a lot of these other companies. And why is that important as an AI safety team? Because if you don't add the right filters to this information, then I think the example given was people could use Galactica to leverage chemistry and virology within the database to synthesize chemical weapons or assemble bombs. It's like, all right, you could get that on the internet. I get that. I understand that. But why are we making that easier? Why is there not even just like some kind of an oversight body, even within Meta, that's just gonna scan this stuff and make sure that their AI is, let's just call it ethical, right? So I think this also opens this other can of worms on what is the ethical use of AI, especially when we're talking about scientific information knowledge. Because I think what we've seen, fun fact, I think there's been more than 100,000 papers published on COVID just in the last, in the first 12 months of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Who's culling through this stuff? What are the parameters? Autism, yes, no. Vaccines cause autism, yes, no, yes. I mean, totally not helpful.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what I know Meta has said that they're trying to own the metaverse or at least be an essential part to it, but I just don't know what Facebook is anymore. And that's kind of why I would think they would produce this. I know it's called Galactica, but I've been calling it Galaxy Brain by accident. Because it's come up with some galaxy brained answers. But yeah, I just don't even understand why some of these tech companies, especially in this environment, would be pushing large projects like this that are really just there to make them seem like futuristic, right? There was a point where the money was so much in the sector. I mean, it was just overflowing, where it was almost kind of part of your marketing to not get Xerox parts, to try and do these moonshots. I mean, that's why Google became Alphabet. But I think we're kind of seeing in the new kind of capital environment and also just tech being so much a part of our lives and less this exciting kind of thing that we're like, can you believe all this progress that it's making? I think the next kind of leaps and bounds are going to be happened by more practical technologies like what Josh is working on, to be honest. Real world stuff. That's just my take, rather than kind of fanciful, like, what did the CEO say we should be working on today sort of projects.
I was going to say, Mike, that might be a great segue to my article, because when you talk about real world stuff, okay, so here,
I almost used this article, Dawn. So like when you put it in, I was like, oh, got to find a new one.
I'll tell you, this is so cool. So this is a group in Japan. They're making electricity from snow. The test of this starts next month, December. It's going to run through March in a city called Aomori. Now, Aomori spends tens of millions of dollars every year to remove snow. And what do they do with it? They dump it into the ocean. A gentleman, associate professor at the University of Electrocommunications in Japan, a guy named Koji Inaki. He's a professor there. He was inspired by a European startup that was using sand to produce electricity. And he thought, hey, we have all of this snow. What can we do with this? And so here's how they're going to do it. They're going to generate electricity using the temperature differential between the snow and the outside air. They're going to put a heat transfer tube in the snow, and then the outside air will be heated by the sun, right? The difference in temperatures will create a convection current, and that will create coolant inside of a turbine, and that turbine will be used to produce electricity. I know, like, that's what the article explained. I'm not a scientist. It made a lot of sense to me. I know people are already doing this, like, in the oceans. In fact, another Japanese company called Mitsui OSK Lines is commercializing the temperature between surface water and the ocean depths to produce electricity. And what's really cool about this, when you think about sustainability, is that it's pretty harmless to the environment. I mean, they're removing the snow anyway, dumping in the ocean. What do they do with the excess snow? Well, they do the same thing, right? It melts. It's all good. So they're also looking at hot springs as an example to do this for even larger temperature variations. And so this is really, really cool. I love what they're doing here, and I was really excited by it. So it's a happy note to end the show on, that we can be using snow to produce electricity, which is definitely needed. So would love to hear. Let's start with you, Josh. What are your thoughts on this?
Without diving too deep into it, the first thought is, what is there's going to be energy that's going to be put in to move the snow to some location for this to happen. So it'd be interesting to see the calculations of how much coal, or these forklifts that I saw in that picture, it's burning some kind of coal, right? So how much energy do you need to put all this snow into the area to then generate energy? And hopefully it's more than what that thing could have just turned a turbine by itself anyways, right? These are the things I'm always interested in, to see what that factor is. What is that efficiency factor? That's my only thought right now off the top of my head.
That's a great point. I mean, unless they're using all electric vehicles and then, using some electricity generated from the snow to move the snow, if you're just using diesel or gas, you're just polluting the environment anyway. That's a great, great point. Jonty, how about you?
I had actually had a similar thought, and I was wondering if it was almost like a closed loop system where you use the energy to move the snow that you get from the energy from doing this thing. If basically you're just getting to the point where you can move snow for free, which is, a good thing, particularly if you're not polluting the air, if you can generate what you need to generate in order to do your task. I don't think it needs to be this great grand thing, but I think if you can generate that amount of electricity to take care of the issue at hand, then it's a winner. So I found the technology fascinating. It's like, I never would have considered using snow to gain energy.
Yeah, I just love this article because, just thinking about alternative forms of energy is one thing, but thinking about energy optimization, this seemed to be kind of taking a lens on the world as, wait, this is already happening. We already know that this natural kind of physical reaction generates steam energy, right? Convection energy, that's what it is. So how do we just look around the world around us and say, let's harness that steam, let's figure out a way to get it. If this does have a decent output, more technologies like this, or tidal, for example, I think is a very underdeveloped kind of similar model, natural occurrence that could be harnessed for energy. How do we get to a point where we're actually looking back at photovoltaic cells and being like, well, they require rare earth minerals and that's wasteful, right? I think if we really do optimize our energy input and output, something like this could actually be revolutionary, because there's a lot of damn snow around.
Yeah, I think
what where you live. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say,
Josh lives.
Yeah, there's no snow here in California, Southern California. In the mountains there is. It's nice. But we're definitely not trying to figure out ways to optimize how to get rid of any snow. If it comes, we go and ski on it or something. but to Jonty's point, I think that's great. Like, no need to think of this as this is going to solve the energy problem or whatever. The snow for them is a problem, they need to move it anyways. And if you can just get to the point where you are offsetting the energy required to move that by using the snow's thermal energy that's I guess it's the differential between the ambient air and the snow's thermal energy. The snow is so low temperature, you're using the differential there. If you can just use that to offset the energy required to move that, and you're not have to burn coal to do that, then I think that it's a win.
They were, I mean, maybe there is a bigger vision here. And, again, depending on the time of year, how much snow, but, when solar started, it was giant solar farms out there, companies using that. And I've got 16 of them, solar panels on my roof right now, here in Colorado, and that powers my Tesla. And, I don't have to go to a gas station. It's awesome. I love it. I imagine for the people of Amori, if they could, kind of figure this out, and then you could have some kind of a unit right at your house that could be at a minimum, to going back to Josh's original art, like complementary or a backup source of energy, because, you get a horrible snowstorm, power goes out. But if you have this excess capacity in some way from the snow itself, imagine that. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, well, it's combination of excess capacity or a new way to manufacture energy that doesn't have as many negative side effects as high input, high output energy. That just, even if it only adds 1%, taking 1% off the grid, that 1% matters. And then the other thing is just the ability to store it, right? So that we have improved battery storage technology. And I think when we talk about, some of the impacts that battery technology has, ripping it out of the earth and so on, it's important to remember that other processes don't store energy at all. So not losing energy is also very valuable energy we've already created. And one of the things that was interesting in this article that was brought up is Japanese natural occurring hot springs. So that would be taking two natural occurrences and combining them for a higher output than what is even being tested here, because then it's a lot less, or you're getting more steam, bang for your buck, literally, for the same amount of snow. So that should be interesting too.
Hey, Mike, we don't have enough time to really get into this one, but in the same kind of tranche of articles, I found one where a Japanese company is basically recycling ramen broth to power their trains. And I was like, what? So like just the innovation here, is just, it's mind blowing. And I know you just recently visited Japan, Mike, and we're just completely wowed by how efficient, how modern, how innovative the society was, especially the transportation system. So hats off to Japan. They're doing stuff. They're doing really cool stuff.
Yeah, it's a really nice place. I recommend anybody go to at least get like a counterfactual experience of a capitalist society that is thriving. So anyway, we actually have to close the show off a little bit early today because we started late. So sorry. I apologize to the audience and our guests. But it's been a fantastic time. And thank you so much for bringing great articles to us, Josh and Jonty. Thank you again to the audience for participating today. And Don, we've got some great stuff. We're back, I think, almost on regular schedule now, right? So what's coming up this week?
Almost, Mike. As you mentioned, tomorrow's show with Brendan Groves from Skydio is the Full Tilt. That's our leadership podcast. So we'll be looking at Brendan's personal leadership profile tomorrow. So check that out. All these are 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Eastern, by the way. Wednesday on the Dawn of Drones on Drone Life TV, we have Frank Segara. He is with Connexicor, a Volatus company. So that should be a great time. And then this Thursday, we're already transitioning to a new month on the Dawn of Drones on the Drone Law Connections Clubhouse, a month dedicated to the best of 2022. And we're kicking that off with our month sponsor, Sage Tech Avionics, CEO Tom Fury, on Thursday. And that one actually is at 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern. So, and then Mike, we've got some great guests next week on the show too. If I recall correctly, Karen DeMeo from Aero DeMeo, and your
Kimberly McGuire from I think it's Big Craze. So they make drones for research. Met her in Kyoto actually. So. Another Japan connection. So that's going to be a great episode, and I think that's it right?
That is just tomorrow again, Drone Deck, 5 p.m. Eastern. Check it out, how Drone Deck is bringing us into the future of logistics. So really cool company. So if you don't know a lot about them, you should check it out.
All right, we are